The summer sun was at its peak when Margaret Lewis, a 65-year-old retired schoolteacher, set out on a journey she had been dreaming about for years. She had always been fascinated by history, culture, and stories of resilience. Margaret had raised 2 children who were now grown with families of their own. After decades of taking care of everyone else, she finally felt it was her time to explore the world beyond her quiet town in Kansas. She booked herself on a cultural exchange trip across different states, with the final leg of the journey stretching through the winding roads of the countryside. Margaret loved traveling by bus instead of planes, as it allowed her to meet people, hear their stories, and enjoy landscapes slowly unfolding before her eyes. On one particular bus ride, she found herself seated next to a young man named Daniel Carter. Daniel was just 23, an aspiring photographer who carried a worn-out backpack and a camera slung across his shoulder. His family lived in Georgia, but he had set out alone to capture stories of America's heartland through his lens. His smile was warm, and his voice carried an earnestness that reminded Margaret of her students when she was still teaching. They introduced themselves, and very quickly, conversation began to flow between them. Margaret was pleasantly surprised at how curious Daniel was about her life. Most young people, she thought, usually dismissed conversations with older folks, but Daniel listened with keen interest. He asked her about her teaching years, the challenges of raising children as a widow, and the adventures she had always dreamed of. Margaret, in turn, asked Daniel about his passion for photography, what inspired him to take this journey, and what he hoped to achieve. As the bus traveled through hills and valleys, Margaret shared stories of the countless students she had taught, some who struggled but went on to achieve incredible things. Daniel found himself deeply moved, especially when she spoke about her late husband, a man she had loved deeply, and the challenges she faced after losing him. "I always believed in carrying on with grace," she said softly, staring out the window as fields blurred by. Daniel admired her strength. To him, Margaret wasn't just another older traveler. She embodied wisdom and courage. When the bus stopped for a break in a small town, Daniel noticed Margaret struggling a bit with her luggage. Without hesitation, he rushed to help her. "You remind me of my grandmother," he said with a grin. Margaret laughed warmly, touched by the gesture. They walked together to a diner nearby, where they ordered sandwiches and coffee. As they sat down to eat, Daniel pulled out his camera and showed her photographs he had taken so far. His shots of rural life, kids playing by rivers, and farmers working in fields were stunning. Margaret was astonished at the way he captured raw human emotions through simple frames. Over the next few days of their journey, Margaret and Daniel grew close. They often found themselves sitting together, sharing snacks, or simply talking about life. Margaret told him about books she loved, the poetry that gave her comfort, and the music of her youth. Daniel, in return, shared his dreams of one day publishing a book filled with photographs and personal stories from people he met along the way. They began journaling together, writing little notes about the towns they passed and the conversations they overheard on the bus. Margaret hadn't felt this alive in years. She loved how Daniel's youthful energy inspired her to see the world with fresh eyes. One evening, their bus had to halt due to heavy rain. The passengers were asked to stay in a roadside inn until the storm passed. Margaret and Daniel ended up sharing a small table by the fireplace, sipping hot cocoa while listening to the sound of rain pounding on the roof. The cozy atmosphere made Margaret feel a mix of nostalgia and peace. She confessed that sometimes she felt invisible as an older woman in society, as though people no longer saw her dreams or passions. Daniel leaned forward and said sincerely, "I see you, Margaret. And honestly, you're one of the most inspiring people I've ever met." Those words struck her deeply. It wasn't flattery, she could tell he meant it. For the first time in years, Margaret felt valued not just as a mother or grandmother, but as a person with her own identity and worth. They stayed up late, talking about everything under the stars: loss, hope, second chances, and the importance of human connection. The next morning, when the rain cleared, they resumed their journey. Along the way, Daniel insisted on taking a portrait of Margaret. He asked her to stand by a field where wildflowers bloomed. As he clicked the photo, he said, "This one's special. I want people to see the strength and beauty that comes with a life well lived." Margaret blushed, something she hadn't done in decades, and smiled with genuine joy. As days turned into weeks, Margaret and Daniel's journey became more than just a shared trip. They supported each other. Margaret helped Daniel budget his limited travel money by teaching him simple tricks she had used all her life, and Daniel, in turn, taught Margaret how to use his camera and take digital photographs on her phone. She loved capturing sunsets, meals they shared, and candid moments of laughter. He teased her often, saying she had a hidden talent for photography. When they finally reached their last destination together, a quiet lakeside town, they both felt a pang of sadness knowing their paths would soon diverge. On their final night, Daniel suggested they sit by the lake. The water shimmered under the moonlight, and fireflies danced around them. Margaret felt overwhelmed by the beauty of the moment. She whispered, "This journey has been more than I ever expected." Daniel nodded, adding, "You've changed the way I see life, Margaret. You've shown me that wisdom and youth can walk hand in hand." Margaret took a deep breath and told him that she felt grateful to have met him. She had set out on this trip searching for adventure, but had found something even more precious. A friendship that bridged generations, a reminder that human connections could heal wounds no matter the age gap. Daniel promised to stay in touch, and he did. He often sent her letters and photos, updating her about his travels, while Margaret shared little stories from her peaceful life back home. Months later, Daniel published his first collection of photographs. On the dedication page, he wrote, "To Margaret Lewis, who taught me that journeys are not just about places, but about the people we meet along the way." Margaret cried when she read it, proud of the young man who had once been just a stranger on a bus. Their story became a living testament to how unexpected encounters could bring light, healing, and joy into people's lives. Margaret no longer felt invisible. She felt seen, cherished, and alive again, all because a young traveler had sat next to her during a journey and reminded her that every stage of life held value and beauty. Even years later, whenever Margaret looked at the portrait Daniel had taken of her in the wildflower field, she smiled. That single photograph wasn't just a picture. It was a symbol of a bond that had crossed generations, a reminder that no one is ever too old to discover friendship, adventure, and meaning along life's journey.